This is Antics, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
And the production of the cartridges was not one of these enormous production lines that you might see sometimes. It was 3 or 4 high school students sitting there putting parts in a cartridge.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Ron Hartman was systems coordinator at K-Byte Software, the company that produced 4 games for the Atari 8-bit computers: Krazy Shootout, Krazy Kriters, Krazy Antics, and K-Star Patrol, as well as KDOS, an alternative disk operating system. The company also programmed games for CBS Software. K-Byte Software was a division of Colton Bar Engineering, an engineering company that did CAD/CAM, engineering, and design work. It was founded in 1960 to supply the auto industry with electronic test equipment. This interview took place on April 12, 2016. There's some slight glitchiness at the start of this interview, but it clears up quickly. After the interview, Ron sent me his KDOS cartridge, which I dumped, and it's now available on the Internet Archive. He also sent a few photos of K-Byte ephemera. Check the show notes at ataripodcast.com to see those. Where are you located?
I'm in Gaylord, Michigan, which is about 60 miles south of the Straits of Mackinac, if you know where that is.
I do not. I really don't know Michigan.
Well, the split between the upper and lower peninsula, I'm about 60 miles south of there.
So you're really not far from where you were back in the K-Byte days.
Well, that was downstate in a suburb of Detroit, Troy, to be more specific. Mm-hmm. My time at that location was like 3 years, and then I was sent up here for the manufacturing part of the, well, let's call it the Atari experience.
I saw Colton Bar Engineering described as a CAD/CAM design company, as designing automated plants to build everything from trucks to ashtrays, as custom electronic quality control devices, and manufacturing engineering services, and founded in 1960 to supply the auto industry with electronic test equipment. So what did this company do, and how did it end up making Atari software?
Kevin, I joined the company in 1982, about mid-year. K-Byte was a spin-off from Colton Bar Engineering. A couple of the engineers there apparently decided that they'd like to get into the electronics, the home electronics business. Generally, they were not intimately involved in the day-to-day operations. Effectively, they fed money into us to keep us going, but they really didn't have anything to do with us on a day-to-day basis, except for the one person. Can I mention names, or should I refrain from that?
Please do.
Okay. The driving force behind K-Byte was a fellow by the name of Pat Flynn. As far as I know, he's still involved in it 30 years later in a different form. But anyway, they spun K-Byte off of Colton Bar Engineering. We had really nothing to do with that. You apparently did a little research and discovered what they do. Quite frankly, you know more about what they do than I knew what they do. I didn't really care what they did.
All right, so how did you end up there? Tell me your prehistory on how you ended up there, how you were interested in computers, and how you got hired.
Just good fortune. I had left the Navy. I was doing one thing and another. I think at the time I might have been in insurance, and then a fella called me that I had worked with in the insurance business and said, would you like to come over here and work for K-Byte? Of course, I didn't even know what K-Byte was. And even more than that, I had no idea what a home computer was. Atari, never heard of it, don't know what any. But I said, sure, why not? Sounds like an adventure, and indeed it turned out to be. But so I came into it simply via a friend. And when he brought me in, it was principally for marketing, to effectively sell the product, in this case cartridges, Atari cartridges that we were making at the time. I didn't last very long in marketing because, frankly, it was boring. But the of course, Atari 400, 800 world was much, much more interesting. So that's how I got into it, just being in the right place at the right time.
Nice. So, all right, so you started in marketing. What were you doing, and then what did you transition into? That was
Well,
more
for the
interesting?
short time that I was in marketing, there was one other fella. His name was Scott McFarland. He and I effectively contacted various vendors and tried to convince them that they should carry our product line. They could have been very small, mom and pop operations. It could have been Kmart. I think pretty sure we contacted Kmart. Not sure they ever carried the product, but I know we contacted them. Went to, of course, the Consumer Electronics Show in the 80s. One in Las Vegas, one in Chicago that I remember. And again, that was part of the marketing effort. He may have been marketing, that is, Scott may have been marketing. I wasn't marketing. I was demonstrating the games, which was effectively spending 8 to 10 hours a day playing the game so that other people could watch how it was done. Maybe that's marketing. I don't know. So the whole Atari cartridge, and I include the stick stand. I don't know if anybody ever heard of that.
I don't know what that is. You mentioned that.
I don't know
in
what that
email.
is. It's a hard plastic rectangular base into which is inserted the joystick controller. And they also provided a red ball that fit right on top of the joystick, which greatly stabilized. I'm sure you played with the joystick. It's not real stable.
Right.
So that was part of our product line. So originally it was the 4 cartridges, which was Krazy Shootout, Krazy Kriters, Krazy Antics, and K-Star Patrol, although K-Star Patrol is probably not known by a lot of people. It's hard to find evidence of it online, but I had to find it. So those 4 cartridges and even disc versions of them as well. We did disc duplication. I was involved in that personally for a while.
And was this just manually shoving discs into a machine? I mean, super
That's exactly
low-tech?
what it was.
Wow.
I think we had, if I remember correctly, they were two disc duplication. They were 5 1/4 inch duplicators. I remember duplicating IBM PC software, probably Commodore 64, Commodore VIC-20. Those are the ones that I remember distinctly. So my involvement with K-Byte evolved into production and really ultimately into database programming in the end. But K-Byte didn't last that long. I don't know if you've done your research, but it ceased to exist, I'm going to guess, and I may be wrong on the dates, probably in the about 1988, maybe 87. There was some financial difficulty, and ultimately CBS bought the entire product line and marketed it. If you go online, usually that's the version that you will see, the CBS version of the original 4 cartridges. Although I have one of the original packaged versions before CBS, which is a very unique packaging of the product. I'm not sure I've ever seen it online. If it's important to this, ultimately when we're done, I can send you some shots of that particular product.
I would like that.
So that's kind of how I got into it and what I started to do. I was not in any way involved with programming directly, although ultimately I wound up being, I'm going to say, a babysitter, for lack of a better term. Programmers are just a bunch of space cadets. They are a strange group. And another woman and I, Sue Thompson, we both basically managed the products, the development of the products, and babysat the the programmers. Some of the programming was done absolutely independent of our office. Really, the original 4 products were developed before I joined the company, and they were contractually developed. The programmers that I was involved with were not involved with those Atari cartridges. They were involved with derivatives. Mule is one that comes to mind that was developed for the IBM PC. I know the programmer that did it. His name was Steve Mage, or he was involved. I'm not sure his name is directly associated with it. In a really bizarre twist, as I was doing some background research on this whole thing, I happened to run across one programmer that I knew quite well. His name was Tom Sunday. I found out that he died. I didn't even know anything about him, and just this research brought that to my attention. But we developed many other software programs apart from those cartridges. But the cartridges were, of course, the very first thing that I became involved in.
Right. So what made wrangling the programmers so difficult?
They are a strange bunch. At the time I joined, they were generally either high school students or in college. The high school students were the strangest of the bunch. They had other priorities, and you just had to keep them focused and on track. It's not that I knew anything about the programming, I didn't, but I did know how to manage people, and that's really what the job was.
So you guys did the 4 games that we talked about, and also KDOS. First of all, I want to point out, I mean, you guys were there early. The first games came out in 1981 and 1982. That's kind of on the cusp of the Atari.
Right. The cartridges, I think, came out in 81, if I'm not mistaken.
The date I saw showed 81 and 82. Yeah, the Krazy Shootout was the first one in 81.
KDOS, you found a reference to that?
Yes.
I have a copy of that.
Do you? That hasn't been properly archived yet. The manual's online, but not the actual disc. So, do you know?
Disc? No, it was a cartridge.
Oh, was it? Oh.
Yes.
Oh.
At least the version I have is a cartridge.
Oh, wow. That's weird. I might need to borrow that from you and make a copy of that for the archives. I don't know. Can you tell me the story of KDOS? Were you there? I mean, who decided let's make another DOS? Because that's an up here battle.
I can't. I don't know anything about it, to be honest with you. I have a cartridge, but its background I really have no idea.
Okay, fair enough.
I have used it. I mean, 30 years ago I used it, but I can't even now remember how.
All right, so there was those 5 programs, but then also K-Byte made programs for CBS. Was it like an outsourced company that made programs that were then CBS branded, such as Mountain King and others?
Well, Mountain King is near and dear to my heart. It's the one that I usually demonstrated. I became very good at it. I wrote the manual, as a matter of fact. That was developed by EF Dreyer. You may see some reference to that online. That's the original 2 programmers of Shootout and Kriters and Antics. Keith Dreyer, who, by the way, now is a respected doctor of radiology at Massachusetts General. I looked him up. Associate professor at Harvard, very respected individual.
Keith Dreyer, D-R-Y-E-R?
Yeah, Keith Dreyer, D-R-E-Y-E-R.
D-R-E-Y-E-R. And he was the programmer of the
He and another guy named Tory Meter were the developers of those original, probably all 4 of them, because they were they were copyrighted by Keith Dreyer's father, I think, who is E.F. Dreyer. You'll see it somewhere some references to EF Dreyer.
Was it copyrighted by the father because Keith was too young?
It could have been so. I'm pretty sure that the two of them, Meter and Dreyer, were both in college at the time, and yeah, I think E.F. Dreyer, the father, may have worked for Colton Bar Engineering. That's a guess, but I'm pretty sure that's true. So really, E.F. Dreyer is the father, if you will, literally and figuratively, of the original 4 cartridge games. The Tory Meter, I tried to look up. I couldn't find him.
Meter, M-E-T-E-R, maybe?
M-E-E-D as in dog, E-R. Meter.
Okay.
Tory, and I think it's T-O-R-R-I-E, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you. All right, interesting. I'll research that
Now,
later.
some of these things, Kevin, I actually had to go online and look up because 30 years ago, I can't remember this stuff.
I get that answer a lot on these interviews.
Actually, the best source of information I found for my own background with K-Byte was there's another website, an Atari website. Wait a minute, I might have it. Let me just look it up real quickly here. AtariAge.com.
That's
I'm
a good
sure
one. Yeah,
You're familiar with them?
I am.
Yeah. And I found some really interesting articles by people I knew that goes way back to the early 80s. So some of these names that I'm rolling out, it's not like I remember them. I had to look them up.
So, okay, you talked about hand duplicating the discs. Can you talk to me about production of cartridges? Was that outsourced, or did you do that in-house?
No, the cartridges were produced in our location in Troy, Michigan. It was not a big building. It was kind of small, and the production of the cartridges was not one of these enormous production lines that you might see sometimes. It was 3 or 4 high school students sitting there putting parts in a cartridge. Now, naturally, we had to, in addition to assembling the cartridge, and there really wasn't that much to it. Naturally, there's flow soldering of the boards. We had to actually burn EPROMs, which were the programs themselves. The boards were socketed, and so it was a pretty simple matter of assembling a few components on the board, burning the EPROM, popping it in, and I don't know how they put the cartridges together. They didn't snap together. It was some kind of a gluing process, I guess. And then, of course, labeling and packaging. So it was all done at our small office there in Troy.
Nice.
When I joined the company, there was a manager, there was the 2 marketing people, Scott and I. The programmers, many of them were contracts, so we never really saw them. And then there were 2 or 3 squirrely high school students that did some programming. And there was another woman, and she was the office manager, so that was the whole staff.
Not a big operation.
Not at all.
Still unclear on the relationship with CBS. Did you guys make software that was then sold by CBS? Before they took over everything, I mean.
The CBS takeover would not have happened had K-Byte remained in solid financial position, but for whatever reason, I don't know the background of that part of it, they did not. And so CBS bought the rights to the 4 original cartridges, and we produced them to some extent there in Troy. And then there came a point when the manufacturing operations moved north to where I am, excuse me, in Gaylord, Michigan, and the administrative and sales operation remained down in metropolitan Detroit. So the manufacturing became more sophisticated when it was moved up here to Gaylord. But that was CBS's involvement. They bought the 4 titles. Mm-hmm. They also had Mountain King was packaged. I'm not sure there were any others that I can remember that were packaged by CBS. Now, we did go, the manager of K-Byte, John, and I forgot his last name.
Matthews?
Yeah, that seems kind of familiar.
Because that's the answer.
He and I went to New York to CBS, and we went there to sell other products and software ideas other than the original 4 cartridges. They bought several of the ideas, and one of which was mine. There was programming done on those ideas. But so far as I know, none of them ever reached completion.
What was your idea?
It was, to my recollection, it was entitled Battle Stations. As a matter of fact, Tom Sunday, who I mentioned, as far as I know, he started the programming. But again, it never completed. It was, well, it doesn't matter what it was, but
Yes, it does.
primitive by today's standards. Cutting edge at the time, I guess.
Sure.
So that's CBS's involvement as far as I can remember.
All right. So I've looked up this stick stand that you mentioned. It's a little heavy stand that you put your joystick in with a big ball on top just to make the games
Did you
easier
find
to
it?
control. I found a picture of it, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's it. You couldn't play any game decently without it. At least I couldn't. Apparently you didn't.
I didn't have one, and I managed to muddle through.
And I didn't even keep one. I've never even seen one.
So what haven't we talked about that time that we should have? What haven't I asked?
It was a small, tight-knit group at that time. A bunch of people who, some knew what they were doing, and people like me who didn't know what they were doing. But we all had just a wonderful time. And I had grand experiences at CES, demonstrating the games, as I've mentioned, but just that whole experience of being exposed to all the new stuff that's out there now. And of course, that's still going on naturally. As I'm looking at you, I'm looking at my screen where I'd taken some screenshots of the various things of K-Byte that I remember, but we've kind of talked about them. They're pretty much the cartridges. My career, of course, went with K-Byte as it matured, if you will. Ultimately, it was purchased by Reptron Electronics, and then the name disappeared, and we became Reptron Electronics and became a full service electronics assembly house.
And you stayed on after that?
25 years worth, yeah.
Wow.
It evolved in the end where even Reptron disappeared. Well, Reptron didn't disappear, but the K-Byte identity and Reptron was bought by Kimball Electronics. And to this day, as far as I know, I haven't looked it up recently, but Kimball Electronics is still in the electronics business in Tampa, Florida.
Cool. So you mentioned something in an email. You said you had some stuff around, and some of it I'm curious. You said an inertia cart and a tester cart for AMC Renault. And what are these things?
Well, since we were experienced at doing cartridge assembly, we did some business for AMC, the long defunct AMC.
It's the car company, right?
Yep, it was a tester cartridge, which was exactly the same size and dimensions as the Atari cartridge, except that, of course, it was automotive. What it did, I have no clue. But as a matter of fact, I could crack it open and I'm sure I would find an EEPROM in it. That's exactly the kind of thing that we were pretty good at. I'm trying to think of some of the other things that we got involved in. And I think I pretty much touched on everything that we did. I'm not really in touch with any of those people anymore and haven't been for years. Like I say, I only found out that one of my friends had died back in '09. just by doing research for this interview.
What do you do today?
I do retired.
Okay, what does that mean?
I'm good at it.
Excellent.
Well, I guess I have the good fortune that my wife continues to work. Actually, what happened, the operation up here in Gaylord, Michigan of Kimball Electronics ultimately was sent overseas. So our jobs were, poof, gone. And I never really did anything after that. I just thought it was time to call it quits. So now I spend, well, almost 8 hours a day at sitting here at this computer doing one thing and another.
Fun.
Yeah, as a retirement activity, you can't beat it.
Nice. Nice. I think that's all the questions I have.
Okay. Obviously, if I think of anything meaningful, Kevin, I'll forward it to you.
Thank you so much, Ron.
Okay, Kevin, you take care, and we'll see if we can find something to send to you.
Okay, great.
All right, thank you, Kevin.
Bye.
I know.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.